Atleo joins me now from the Danish capital. What was that meeting about? What were the words that were passed between you and the Prime Minister, Chief?
It was our first opportunity to have a discussion, and I was very encouraged. It's a discussion that we've been looking to have since the election that took place this last July. And for about an hour, we talked about the issues of First Nations in Canada, issues like education, supporting young people, lifting our communities out of deep poverty, the need to build over 60 schools, for example, to increase the full spectrum of education. And overall, it was a good conversation about the fact that, you know, treaties help form Canada, and we still need to return back to the principle of a real relationship based on mutual recognition, mutual respect, and that we share equally in the benefits of the land. And I guess it links very powerfully with the issue of climate change that we share, and the reason why I'm here, in fact, and agreed to be one of the advisors to say Indigenous peoples, First Nations, must be at the forefront. We're at the forefront of the crisis. We need to have frontline status and be at the forefront of responding to these issues. And so I was very pleased and feel very encouraged by our discussion.
You talk about relationships having respect. I don't see Canada getting much respect there in Copenhagen. I mean, we got the colossal fossil award. That's got to make us hide our head in shame. So what good is Canada doing there? Let me in on that.
Well, you know, we just heard that delegates are canceling flight plans. I just had a friend say President Obama has canceled his flight plans and delegates are staying. I don't know anything more than that, but what we do know is that, you know, it's an unprecedented number. In fact, the number of world leaders here, it hasn't been this since the United Nations was in fact formed. And so we heard some incredibly powerful interventions on the plenary today. I was really pleased, for example, that Ben Powless of Six Nations, a youth delegate representing the Indigenous Peoples Caucus, and I really support the fact that he took stage in the plenary to bring the Indigenous voice. You know, I'm responsible for advocating for 633 First Nations across Canada, but we're part of a global Indigenous network, and we're all encouraging the nation states. This is a moment that must be grasped. And so there has been, you know, waning notion of the possibility of success, but even in the moments where I'm standing talking to you, there's a buzz afoot on the floor that delegates are staying, that perhaps there's a renewed sense that something can get done. The dynamics are similar, many people would say, to Kyoto, where it wasn't until the waning moments when an agreement was reached then. And so I think this is a moment that doesn't end in Copenhagen in many respects. It's just beginning. And when we all get home, we need to, of course, redouble our efforts as citizens of Canada, not only in the relationship with First Nations in Canada, but on issues like the climate change. And we've got to move towards building a conservation economy and seriously address the issue of climate change.
Chief, you talk about Canada or Indigenous people wanting their voice to be heard, and as a Canadian as well, you want Canada's voice to be heard. But here's the challenge. U.S. President Barack Obama had a special meeting with world leaders this morning. He didn't invite our Prime Minister, so the Canadian voice was not at that meeting. What does that tell you?
Well, the thing I've heard from other delegates from other countries that our delegation, of which I'm not a part, I'm simply advocating the issues of First Nations to the Canadian delegation for the issues that First Nations have. But we've been hearing that First Nations have been in the room, they've been active, they've been engaged, and Canada is on the world stage, one of over 190 countries. And so when Obama arrived, America is front and center in this. And so I guess in some respects, you know, it doesn't surprise me, given that Canada is such a small country in the big picture. But nonetheless, like Canada has done historically in areas like human rights, in my view, you know, the citizens of Canada need to push Canada to be a leader when it comes to addressing the issues of climate change, and also to be a leader. And I'm pleased that I was invited to be one representative on the group of advisors to say Indigenous peoples, both at home, within the boundaries of Canada and internationally, are feeling the effects, like in my village, where the reduction in the return of salmon to our streams, it takes important fish out of our diet. We see increases in diabetes. We see increases then of early deaths. So we have impacts that are occurring in a first world developed country like Canada and equally so in other parts of the world where Indigenous peoples do not have, very much of a voice. And so this is also about international Indigenous solidarity, working together. And I was really pleased that a Mohawk from Six Nations in Ben Powless was standing before the world stage saying, Indigenous peoples, we must be at the forefront. And so it really is about saying that together we've got to turn this dark chapter on a very heavy dark chapter on a very horrible part of our history and turn a new page together. And so my conversations with the Prime Minister, my interactions with Minister Prentice, I've been pressing the issues of First Nations, on the issues of climate change and the need to build a green economy. We have to have resources for things like adaptation, mitigation.
Okay.
We need to address issues around infrastructure and housing, for example.
I want to thank you, Chief, for taking the time to talk to us, and I wish you well. Sean Atleo, National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, speaking to us in Copenhagen. You take care.